Hey, what's up guys, it's T-Bone here and welcome back to another episode of playing Legendary Game of Heroes. So in today's episode, I want to cover a few things. The first one is going to be guild versus guild, some decks and some teams I'm using that could potentially be used for you, and also talk about the test season that we're currently in, which is called War of Harmony. The second thing I'm going to talk about is also the deck that I'm using to take down this week's Legend Trial boss. And finally, I want to take some time to talk about my personal thoughts and opinions on the latest Slayer event that just took place, and some of my thoughts on what I would like to see differently in the future. So as I mentioned, for Guild vs. Guild, we're now in the new season called War of Harmony, which is going to be 1 week long, and this is only a week long with reduced rewards, and there's a couple of tweaks that have been made. The first one is going to be the health of the wardens, so they've been significantly boosted, and all of this information is also in the newsfeed, by the way. And the second thing they've also done is reduce the keys from 2 to 1, and what I'm really interested here is your thoughts and your personal experience with this particular change during this test season. Now, one of the things that the devs have mentioned as a reason for this tweak is to try and reduce the number of ties overall. But I wanted to know what your experience is like with this particular change, because the more feedback we can give them, the more, the better we can help them make the tweaks. Also, the changes that are introduced in this particular season aren't supposed to be permanent, so I would expect that we would have 2 keys starting the next season. So anyways, let's talk about some of the decks I have here. So I've specifically picked one of my guildmates here because this is a team that relies on health rather than dispel for the fights. And with this particular setup, I have just enough health to withstand the first hit for this team. And we can also talk about the stats of the cards a little bit later. I can showcase that after this fight. But basically, with the Thoth team, which is the most previous fire commander team, it has really high health, and I can use this to my advantage. And also, it creates power gems. Each of the the event card and also the master collection card, they all create power gems, which is basically the main way to defeat the bosses here, so it doesn't actually depend on the nuke damage. As you can see here with this particular setup, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Fell Clan Bomber that requires 20 gems to power up, but once I do, it gives me 2 additional turns to basically get more fire gem swaps, and also allows me to power up my basically for my card's battle skills to be available again, so that I can go ahead and use them. So you can see here I now will be able to activate everything again with just 1 turn remaining, and then I can just basically rinse and repeat, continue to do this sort of style wave after wave after wave, and I'll be able to take down the bosses quite easily. And so this is one of the decks here that I can use. I'm going to go ahead and quit out this, and I can talk about the relics I brought in here. So Titan Shield is what I'm using, and I have 3 of them actually, and these shields can be obtained in commander events through free through just collecting the trophies. So these are the highest, they give the highest health, and so you really need to run these in order to be successful with that particular setup. And I also have a raised staff that gives me additional attack, but also some pretty good health boost. And finally, you do need to have 1 of the relics here to make sure that you can get enough gems to power up your team. Now, another team that I wanted to showcase here is featuring Kanara, or there are other affinities that do the same thing, but for my particular team setup here, Kanara works best. And this card actually will give you immunity for 1 turn, but it does have a pretty high gem requirement at 24 gems. So now if you're fighting a team other than that a defender that starts anything other than flatline, you can actually give this a try. So this team will actually use a card to revive. In my case, it's Mondo Nighthill. And this particular setup, I chose Zeus simply because I don't have enough light relics yet. So I'm using him to give me the Fabled relics. The next event will have a light creature relic, and so I can use that to power up. I can use Kanara and that relic, so I can actually avoid using Zeus here. I would much rather use Wella and other cards that are all light. but this deck works as well. So let's take a look and see how this works. But it really works best if you can bring in other cards that give you lots of gems every turn. And that's why running double Indale is going to be ideal here. Now, this isn't a guarantee though, because of my particular setup. I don't know if I will have enough gems to power up my cards at the beginning of each turn, and it looks like I will, so that's good. So in this particular case, because it's not flatline, I'll revive here. And then instead of delay, I can also just use this card for invulnerability. And the reason I would want to do that mostly is because this setup works well for alacrity bosses. I don't personally have an alacrity boss I've powered up, so that's why I'm using the Monarch Ubu instead. But the idea is the same. You would basically, charge up your cards and basically charge up Kanara to give you invulnerability, which doesn't get impacted by alacrity. And then you can basically then just nuke down the defender constantly using, I would use Wella in this case. And if there's another light, nuke damage dealer in the future, that will use that as well. But, basically this is how you play. Now, Zeus is not the greatest, and I'm also going up against a light defender, but the point here, really is to just kind of show how this works. Like, you can basically rinse and repeat constantly here. It is going to take a little longer, especially if you don't have a good nuke, but it's a good alternative to using a dispel for alacrity, especially if it's not a guarantee. And so these are sort of some of the ideas here for how you can deal with teams, sort of how you can deal with guild versus guild fights when you don't want to risk using a card that may or may not dispel what you want to actually dispel. So besides that, I also showcased this particular setup that I, a few episodes ago, that uses, Parody and Mothership to dispel flatline, and then you would use turn delay cards and then nuke them down. This is the most sort of, except for the risk of 40% failure, this is a pretty common sort of setup that a lot of people also use. So now, the teams I'm using for this week's Legend Trial boss, I actually found that I am able to use. So you can see here, I've been able to deal a total of 324 billion damage, but only about 30 of them came from this particular deck, from the event deck. That's 2 support cards. I only have 1 event card, and I have an ultra rare, and I'm using Guru Pagicep to heal. So with this particular deck, I dealt about 30 damage, and so the rest of the damage actually came from the last Dark Commander deck. So I actually used this for the previous trial event, but at the time I didn't actually use a clock stopper. This time I did. So this time I took out Exenka, and I brought in the Nightblood Servant, which is a card that generates heart gems, so that I could actually stop the clock. And I was able to build up quite a bit of intensity, and I was able to deal about 290 280 to 290 billion damage. And so even though it's against a neutral affinity, it still works really well. It's just that because of the way this team works, it was about a quarter of the damage that I was able to deal against light, and this will definitely not be the deck that you want to use against a dark boss. But this actually works okay against Sentry Storm, so I'll be using this. I think Amy is another deck that I could use. I took her out though, but the Amy deck is another one that could be used for this particular setup. And so I'm not going to show I'm not going to showcase this because I already showed this particular team in the last episode, but know that this is the team. If you have this team, you can use this. If you have the event deck that's better than this one, you can use this to one-shot the boss for sure, but you'll need to have at least the Master Collection card, maybe 2 of them, or Master Collection card with 2 event cards. Ultra Rare would be the best, or if you have the Armor Tank Oryx, that's another option as well. So that deck can definitely take out the boss here. But with this particular setup using the ultra rare and the event card, unfortunately, it's just not power enough to do so. So that actually leads me to sort of talk about this previous event. And I wanted to really, I don't really do this often, but I definitely wanted to make sure I talk about sort of what I've observed here. So this particular event, what I saw was once the elite bosses came up, everybody basically focused on that, but nobody could take it down if you don't have the event deck. I actually, with the deck that I had, that used, 2 support cards, a feature card, and an ultra rare, I could only deal about 200 billion damage, maybe 250 if I were fast, and it just wasn't quite enough to do anything against the guild elite bosses that has 6 trillion health. And so I tried my best to help the guild out. I tried my best to get the 5% damage, but in the end, it just felt like, it wasn't quite enough. And this is, I think, the issue with the health of the bosses in general. So the introduction of the elite bosses has introduced this sort of disparity between the power of the event deck versus non-event deck. So I tried other decks as well. Nothing really worked, and I couldn't really, use any deck that I have invested in to deal as much damage as I would have liked. And I can understand that, how it must feel really disheartening. So personally, I think that the overall changes that have been taking place in Slayer events in the past, it was actually really good. So there's the participation rewards and some of the things that they've been doing to sort of help make the grind a little easier. Unfortunately, that got eclipsed with elites. Now, I can understand that some of you may really like the elite bosses. That's totally understandable. But from my personal interactions with others, what I've heard is it just was too much. A little too much health, and it made the other decks they've invested in feel less valuable. And so what I like to see moving forward is, perhaps not running elites anymore. I think this was intended to be an experiment to see how much we can push the envelope by. And in fact, this was already a reduction from the first time when we saw hundreds of trillions of health for the elites. And this, I think, is still a little too much. Now, I think somewhere in between will be good. A little, we definitely want something that's higher than just 10, 20 billion, but we want somewhere that's in the middle, right? A few hundred billion maybe. I'm not sure what the right value would be, but I think that, giving a setup like this, right, where it uses a couple of support cards, a event card, and I got lucky with one ultra rare, but let's say there is no ultra rare. How did those decks succeed? Like we need to be thinking about how to make lesser investment decks to be at least competitive. Doesn't have to be the best, but I think being able to take down some bosses, being able to feel like you can do something against the bosses here is what's going to make it more fun. Now, personally, I also feel that commander-based decks retain their value a bit better over time compared to Slayers. That's because Slayers have, multiplicative, the damage is multiplied based on the number here. So when it was a times 10, times 13, you're getting 13 times the bonus. Compared to a commander deck, the damage bonus based on commander gems isn't it's additive, and so when it moves off of the event, its impact is less noticeable compared to a Slayer event, where it doesn't seem to be as useful after its own event. And so that's just my personal take on it. I still think that the network team they've provide a lot of communication, and they're definitely looking to improve. And I'm hoping that we can provide our feedback on what's working, what's not, and what we think would be better for the experience overall. So again, I'd like to hear your feedback. Let me know what your thoughts are and what you'd like to see different, and hopefully we can see some of that change as well. So anyways, that's all for this particular episode. Join me again tomorrow as we talk about the preview for the upcoming event. I'm pretty excited because it's another light commander event, so I want to see what the change is going to be like. Commander is becoming my preferred events now. And so we'll talk about the deck there, we'll talk about the preview, and then we will obviously be playing with more deck ideas as well. So thanks for watching, thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next episode.